Thanks. Okay, we're going to get started with community service. The first item on the agenda is declarations of.
Thank you, Madam. I'm just going to be consistent and declare my son is the president of the Cambridge Social Planning Council. Thank you.
Whoops. I'm also going to declare a potential pecuniary interest. The first delegation up is Maria Kwasinski, who is a past employee of the YW. I work with that organization. I'm not sure of the nature of the presentation, but because it may touch on the YWCA, I want to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest. So with that, and for this delegation, Chair Redmond's going to assume the chair.
So, Ms. Kwasinski, if you'd like to address the council or the committee. Welcome. Yep. Go to the podium.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to apologize in advance. This is the first time that I'm doing something like this, so if you could please bear with me. So, my name is Maria Kwieciński. I came here to draw the Council's attention to the situation of persons using the overflow shelter. The overflow shelter opened in the beginning of November last year to provide people who otherwise would be sleeping on the streets with a mattress on the floor. People, men and women, arrive there around 9 p.m., sign in and go to their mattresses. There is no food available to them except of a granola bar and some juice, which is distributed in the morning. While there is an expectation that they can eat at the soup kitchen until 4 p.m. and then walk to 2 kilometers to the Ray of Hope, the soup kitchen is closed on the weekends, and the Ray of Hope closes at 1:30 p.m. on Saturday and 6 p.m. on Sunday. That means that when the homeless arrived at the shelter, they are not only cold, they are also hungry. The majority of the overflow users' health is already jeopardized just by living on the streets. There are also addictions and mental health issues. There are a number of people who are old and frail, and none of them are dressed appropriately for the weather. My proposition to the region is to revisit their plan and include a sandwich and a warm drink when they arrive at the shelter. I strongly disagree with an opinion that we shouldn't make them too comfortable because they won't be motivated to find housing. As a society, I believe we should strive to help the growing population of homeless as much as possible, given that there is little to nothing in terms of affordable and supportive housing or addiction treatment that we can offer to them at this time. Offering them a sandwich is the least we can do, especially in the winter, and will not result or should not result in anyone taking an advantage of it and demanding the second one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kwasinski. I don't see any questions. So, Councillor Clark, you want to resume the chair?
Chair Clark, Regional Council members and staff, I ask permission to use my maiden name because I'm talking about bed bugs, and there is a big stigma attached to that, and I have grandchildren and family members living in the community, and I don't think they'd want their names attached to this issue. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about bed bugs in my apartment building and in my apartment. I'm at risk of eviction due to my bed bugs and the amount of contents in my apartment. I have until February 4th to empty out all of the contents of my apartment into a cargo bin I don't know the exact term, an N78 will be issued for my eviction. I have lived in this apartment since 2005 when I left my matrimonial home. The rent there at that time in 2005 was $650, so it was affordable. And with rent control, it's now close to $750, but that's still very affordable. It is close to 2 bus routes and walking distance of food and bus routes and medicine. It takes 30 minutes to get to work on the bus. I'm a casual part-time employee. I have also requested at the City of Kitchener to seek approval to speak on this issue, and hopefully sometimes in March I will be able to do that, because property standards is usually involved with the bed bug issue. This is a complicated story, and having bed bugs has affected every aspect of my social life. I have trouble sleeping, I've lost weight, I have a little higher than normal blood pressure. And for example, at Christmas, I wrapped all of my Christmas gifts in the laundry room, and a friend kept them so that I wouldn't be wrapping them in my apartment. I believe I have had bed bugs in my apartment since September of 2018. And this is not the first time. There was also an infestation in 2017 where 10 of the 15 units were affected. The landlord did not want to spray, did not want to maintain, and gave people cans of Raid. Sometimes some of the tenants ended up in the hospital because they had gotten too close and they had breathing problems. The first time I had bed bugs was in June of 2017. And I had actually been asking for divine assistance to help with the clutter in my apartment, and I felt that that was the answer, and so I didn't really struggle too hard with the issues that happened. The reason I'm speaking publicly is the lack of assistance to help tenants comply and cope with dealing with landlords and the treatments. When I filed the complaint with Property Standards in December because they were not treating my unit, the landlord and the exterminator started making more stringent compliances for me to comply. I was already living in very tight quarters. Everything was in plastic bins, and they said that everything had to be removed from all my shelves. All my books, all my clothing, everything. They also implied, and I've included it in your email, on your visual. They also served me with costs of $850, which I did not agree to pay because I felt that I didn't cause the problem. But part of the problem, part of the issue is that the landlord, in saying they took a photo of it and it should be on the screen somewhere. So part of the issue is that in order to not, they're willing to maintain and spray for bugs, but they want the tenants to pay for the costs. So they have to try to prove that we brought them in. When I was at the Landlord-Tenant Board hearing, the paralegal for the landlord asked if I took public transit, as if that was a reason why I should be paying costs, because just simply taking public transit would mean that I had brought them in. So I'll just give you a short history, and then I will talk a little bit about why it's so important for some sort of a coordinated effort to be made for people who are in the same situation as I am. In August 28th, bed bugs were discovered in the apartment below me. In August 28th, the landlord said that maintenance costs would be applied to the tenants. I contacted the landlord-tenant board on the 29th, and they said that costs can't be applied to tenants unless they aren't cooperating with treatment. Treatment began. On September 9th, they came in and looked at my apartment, and they said there was too much clutter. This is a first world problem, I recognize it, but I've been there for 10 years, and I have photo albums and antiques that have been passed down to me from my grandparents. Then on September the 24th, they started spreading to more units. Again, in attempting to get me to pay for the treatments, they said that it was my lack of dusting. Bed bugs, in my experience, aren't caused by dust. September 27th, bed bugs were found in my apartment. And they gave me 1 week to bag and wash all my clothes, remove everything from my cupboards, china, books, and I have a lot of books. I had to basically empty my apartment. And when you move clothing, but you don't have to wash and launder it. So everything had to be laundered. On October 1st, they had spread to 3 apartments on my side of the building. October 9th was my first treatment. Then I had another one on October 10th. On October 11th, I asked for a storage bin. Could I purchase a storage bin and put in my parking space because I don't have a car? That way, if the technician needs to move around my apartment, there'd be more space. That was denied. I can keep going, but basically things escalated. I said I was willing to do whatever I needed to do, but I wasn't willing to pay the costs. So then we ended up at the landlord-tenant board January the 14th. And at that point, the adjudicator, who really doesn't have a lot of experience with bed bugs or pests at all, had to try to address all of the issues, all of the above. So in order to allow me to keep the contents of my apartment, she said that I could move everything out of my apartment, but that I had to empty all cupboards, shelves, bookshelves, everything. And if you think about your house, you think of the kitchen, cupboards, everything you have to empty. Basically, I'm going to end up with an empty apartment. And I have until, and I was lucky enough to find a storage bin, and I was lucky enough to have a friend with a truck to help me move the contents. So I shouldn't be here. I should be at home packing because I have until Sunday to bag, package, clean the remaining contents of my apartment. Or on February 4th, I'm sure the landlord will be happy to issue an eviction notice. Not only for the fact that I haven't complied willingly with paying the treatments, but also because I'm paying about $300 less than what they're currently renting the units for. So there's a couple of issues in play here. So yes, my nerves are shot, and usually I can take a lot, but it's been going on for a long time. When I came in here, I thought, well, where can I sit? I can either sit on those chairs or I can stand. Because if I have any bed bugs on me, they like cloth. So I'm saying that everything that I do. When I was standing outside of a hearing recently with the landlord, she said that I was bringing them from work. So I thought, well, she's likely to call work. So I went to the health unit at the region and talked to somebody, and they said that they're a pest, but they're not something that you can restrict somebody from work about. But they suggested if I had problems that I should phone the Ministry of Labor, which I did do, and they said that I had a duty to report. So I talked to my work, so now all of my things are stored in a rubber bin, and people notice. So I'm saying that there is not a coordinated space for tenants. There's not a place. Property standards, issues an order, and they don't really care how it gets done. By doing that, I realized that, yes, I got the order, and they give the landlord 19 days to comply. But then the landlord and the exterminator started making my life very difficult. So I'm saying that, and at the landlord-tenant board, the landlords usually have paralegals there, and the tenants can get duty counsel for 15 minutes, and we can avoid ourselves, and we can avail ourselves of mediation. But without any kind of legal representation, we are really at a disadvantage. And I'm lucky when I left that I felt lucky that at least the adjudicator was willing to let me take my things and not throw them in the dumpster. But now I'm faced with taking a week off work to pack.
Marianne, you're over your time. Do you have a
what I'm saying is this issue really is a broader issue than a City of Kitchener property standards issue. And there's really nobody to help the tenants. That's it.
Thank you. My son brought bed bugs home from university once, and it took so long time to get rid of them, so I know how challenging it is, definitely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions of the delegation? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any requests to remove items from the consent agenda? No. Seeing none, would anyone like to move the items on the agenda? Councillor Kiefer, seconded by Councillor Nowak. Sorry. All in favor? Thanks. Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve the items or receive for information? No, that's just. Okay. Thank you. Okay. The first item on our regular agenda is Public Health and Emergency Services, the Paramedic Services Master Plan, and we have a staff presentation.
Good morning. Through the Chair, I'm here to present the Paramedic Services Master Plan implementation update, and that's in conjunction with PHE PSV 1902, the report. The 2017 to 2027 10-year Paramedic Master Plan recommended 1, near-term strategies for effective deployment of paramedic services, 2, near-term implementation of required resources to attain a 35% unit utilization, 3, resourcing forecast to maintain 35% unit utilization to year 2027 and beyond, and 4, additional support staff in the areas of logistics, performance standards, and supervision to enable our transition from an efforts-based paramedic service to a performance-based one. Today's presentation will provide context to the 2019 Paramedic Services Budget Issue Paper. This report is intended to provide an update on progress on the Paramedic Services Master Plan implementation, as well as updates to performance data specifically related to response trends, unit utilization and contributing factors, hospital offload delay, code reds, paramedic service peer comparison update. So on the chart being projected, we're talking about response trends from 2015 to 2018. Response volumes have increased by 23%, and that's the black line, the top line on the graph. Patient transports from the scene to the hospital emergency department have increased by 16%, and that's the green line in the middle. This notwithstanding, response times to medical emergencies have improved overall by 6%. This is because the Regional Waterloo Paramedic Services resourcing levels were increased by 7 12-hour ambulances, and that's noted by the yellow boxes below the red line, since 2016. And improvements were made in aligning deployment resources to the call patterns. Unit utilization, so what you have up there is a chart. On the left-hand side, you have unit utilization, from 25 down to 50%, and on the right-hand side you have availability for the next call. At the top you have rapid response, and the bottom rapid response delays. So while committed to a medical call, a paramedic crew is not available to take another request until their patient is released or transferred to the care of another responsible party. Unit utilization is defined as the amount of time committed to medical calls as a percentage of the crew's shift duration. At 40%, an ambulance is committed to medical calls 40% of the time. The likelihood that an ambulance will be available for the next call is 60%. Waterloo Region has adopted a unit utilization target of 35% for its paramedic services, meaning it has established a likelihood target of 65% availability for the next call. To obtain this objective, Waterloo Region has implemented additional resources to increase the number of ambulances and staffing, as recommended by this Paramedic Services Master Plan. However, unit utilization continues to hover system-wide at 41 to 42% unit utilization, having a 58 to 59% availability. This particular graph here is representing additional resourcing timeline and a corresponding unit utilization. And what you'll see on that graph also is a dotted line that goes from left to right, and that's the benchmark of 35% utilization set by the master plan. The graph represents a timeline where additional resources were added to paramedic services since 2015. As we look at to 2017 and 2018 in specific, we can see that additional resources may have had a small impact when initially added, but the unit utilization returns to a value near 40% or higher within several months. The shift change arrow, which is the blank white arrow, it refers to the change in our deployment of resources to a better align with call volumes. Factors contributing to high unit utilization. So increasing response volumes. We're running approximately 1.5 to possibly 2 years growth in advance of the expected growth, and the increasing hospital emergency room delays, offload delays. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. On the particular graph there, you can see that on the black line is the trend line based on actual, and the blue line was the master plan forecast. You can see that in 2020, we had an estimated call volume response of 56,350, and the actual for 2018 was 55,550. This is our offload delay. Offload delay is defined as offload hours in excess of 30 minutes from arrival at the emergency department. From their lowest points in 2016 to 2018, offload delay incidents have increased by 230%, from 4,573 events in 2016 to 10,540 in 2018. And offload delay hours have increased by 375%, from 2,151 hours in 2016 to 8,060 hours in 2018. Code Reds. So code red is when we have no ambulances available to be dispatched for any calls that are coming in. In January 2019, we experienced an increase to code reds, and this is normal for the flu surge season year over year. As code reds increase, it also increases our reliance on neighboring municipal services to provide response within our municipality. Major influencers for code reds are call volume and offload delays. The number of code reds to January 28th was 39. The time spent in code red for January up until January 28th was 15 hours, 25 minutes, and 52 seconds, or almost 33 minutes a day on average. So what you're seeing there at the top is the number of occurrences, and the bottom chart is the total hours in offload delay. This particular shot is a snapshot of current EMS resourcing, and this is should look familiar from the original master plan, where we did a peer comparison between other services of like size and ourselves. Regional Council's commitment to additional resource investment over the last 3 years have reduced the difference in resourcing levels between Regional Waterloo Paramedic Services and their paramedic service peers. The Regional Waterloo Paramedic Services currently operates with 20% fewer paramedics, and that's up from 30% in 2016, and with 10% fewer ambulances, up from 15% in 2016. And just for note, if you're doing the math, percentages are shown rounded to the nearest 5% on that graph. In conclusion, Paramedic Services remains committed to work cooperatively with our hospital partners in the region, and steps are already in progress at an executive level through the region's CAO engaging the CEOs of area hospitals to secure a commitment to work jointly on reviewing, assessing, and taking action on hospital offload delay. Offload delay is not an overnight fix, and it may take considerable time before benefits are realized. Overall, Regional Council has approved budget increases in 2017 and 2018, following approval of the Master Plan in 2016 that are in alignment with the 10-year Master Plan recommendations. Investments have resulted in slight improvements in response times in the context of significant growth in call volumes. However, during the same period, the service has experienced an increase in hospital offload delays and seen minimal progress on improving unit utilization. In 6 to 12 months, the situation will be reassessed. Future improvements in offload delay may allow the region to defer adding additional ambulances in future years. So bullet number 1, Paramedic Services budget issue paper requests 2 12-hour ambulance per the master plan recommendation for 2019. And the second is it's also asking for a second 12-hour ambulance to address response volumes, which are escalating more rapidly than anticipated in the master plan, and to help advance the unit utilization to the approved 35% target. Thank you.
Going to be available in our folders? It already is. Thank you very much. First speaker is Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen, there is some relationship to utilization rates and response times. So have we modeled at all what the utilization rates would look like if we were doing the dispatch? So, you know, saving that additional time that we would save by doing our own dispatch, as we've discussed more recently, with the ministry moving it to Hamilton, does that have an immediate impact on utilization rates? I mean, you're still going to get the same number of calls. Obviously, you're not reducing the number of calls for service. But does it actually have an impact? I mean, response times are impacted, presumably, but the utilization rate.
Right, so through the chair. So you're correct in that the utilization may change with the implementation of the self-dispatch within the region, but that's also predicated on the fact that 1, we have MPDS, 2, that it's done correctly, and the other one would be that we have technologies to actually improve that. So, you know, I've talked before about the improvements that they had seen in Niagara when they did that, but there was lots of technology pieces that were in there. You know, even as much as the 911 alert system, where when the 911 call rings in the dispatch center, it actually pages the close unit within 2 seconds and says, we're on the phone to this address, you need to start moving that way. So those are the kinds of technologies that will improve that. And if you remember, over the years, I've shown a graph about a linear call progression versus the way that it's done in Niagara. So we're going to go away from that linear progression, and we're going to move to that more compact front end, and you're saving, and that's where Niagara was seeing like a minute shaved off of that. So the response times will get better. Utilization won't fluctuate as much because you're shaving off that minute, but they're still doing all those calls, correct?
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Councillor Strickland.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to you, Chief, for that presentation. I got a couple of questions. Just on the code reds, because there was a lot of media attention on the weekend around being in code red and coverages from coterminous municipalities. So it's typical, like, first of all, let's say we don't want to be in a code red. Being a code red is not a situation we'd like our paramedic services to be in. So I think we all recognize that. But it is fairly typical, based on some of the charts that I've seen, that code reds typically spike in January and February. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Typically, because of the flu surge, we do see spikes in January year over year. January, February, just depending on how severe and how long the flu season lasts.
Okay. All right. And so then how does it, maybe just briefly, how does it work when, for example, like on the weekend, we had to have Perth provide a couple ambulances to to alleviate our code red situation. So what's the kind of history behind that sharing of resources, and how does that work provincially?
Sure. So through the chair. So the way that happens is when we get to a code red level, when we don't have any ambulances left because the volume has taken up or offload delay, whatever the factor is, the dispatch center, the ministry dispatch center, actually is responsible for dispatching the next closest ambulance. That's in the legislation. And there's a principle of seamlessness that at the time of transition, the ministry set down that service had to be seamless. So the next closest ambulance comes. So whether that's Perth, Brant, depending on where the call location is, that dispatch center will then either, if the service is under their control, dispatch the next closest vehicle, or they'll ask the London Ambulance Communication Center or Hamilton, whoever the next center is that has control of that vehicle, to send that vehicle over for that particular call.
Okay, and then similarly, if these other areas are in code red, like Brant or Perth or Wellington are in code red, and we have ambulances available, we would provide coverage, right?
That's correct, through the chair. We do service calls outside of this area, and it's pretty much a net zero. We're a bit of a net receiver in the overall picture on a yearly basis, but yes, we do respond outside of our municipality.
Okay, and because of the resources that we've been putting into ambulance, and I recognize it's not perfect, we have more work to do, but you shared some information earlier the week in terms of the amount of the difference between our service units arriving outside and how many come from in. And a few years ago, we were a net receiver of over 500 coverage from 500 calls from other areas, and now we're down to like 100 or so.
That's correct.
Right. So we're improving in that area as well.
That's correct.
All right. And so just because some of the media coverage on the weekend, I think it's important to put that in context. It really made it seem like we were a net receiver of all these services, and we're not doing a good enough job. So I think it's important to kind of straighten the record out on that. And then I'm also wondering, Chief, when you look at the offload delays, and the offload delays continue to be a real challenge. And in your report, you talk about it in the chart there, that the number of offload delayed hours more than doubled from 3,600 hours roughly in 15 to 8,060 hours in 2018. So what does that mean in terms of ambulance availability? And I'll try something out on you. So I did some rough math, okay? Like it's 168 hours in a week, and I divided 8,060 by 168. So there's like 47 weeks out of 52 we're one ambulance short.
That's correct. So if you're losing 8,000 hours per year on an ambulance, the staffing, I think, works out to, 8,370 or 80, something like that. So it's almost a year that you're losing.
Okay. So the offload delays, so you could say that the offload delays, when we're in a code red on the weekend, that if it wasn't for an offload delay, we would have an extra ambulance available and we would only be in a code yellow.
That's quite possible.
Generalizing, because each situation you can have more than one code red at a time, but generalizing, we should, if the offload delay problem was solved, we typically should have one more ambulance available during the week than we currently have right now.
Yes, through the chair. So the only caveat I would put to that, and you're correct in your assumption, but volume plays a role in that as well. Yeah. So you'd have to balance the offload delay to the volume increase.
Right, for sure. Okay, but generally. Okay, and then on this offload delay, I know last time you gave an update, I can't remember how many weeks ago it was, there was direction given and received that Mr. Murray and meeting with the hospitals. And so where are we at with that? Because obviously this offload delay, we have challenges with our system, but offload delay is one that continues to really hang around and impede our ability to deliver the service we want to deliver.
Yeah, so through the chair, maybe I can just give a little bit of an update. So subsequent to that meeting, I've spoken to each of the CEOs at each of the 3 hospitals. I think you're aware that St. Mary's is in a CEO transition. So I had a good chat with the interim CEO. The new CEO is starting in early February, and I've got a joint meeting set up, I think late February, jointly with all the 3 hospital CEOs to go over this issue, share the data with them, and start the discussion about how can we work together to solve this problem. I think what I was able to do with each of them individually was share with them the data related to their own hospitals and the data related to the system as a whole. And so overall, I would say they were aware that this is an issue. I don't think they were aware of how significant it was, and I don't think they were aware of the trends. So they now have that, and I think that's going to help prepare for a productive meeting in late February.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll be able to get some resolution out of that if it means more resources in the emergency rooms to help the offload delay. But then, of course, you have that kind of cascading challenge of, is there room in the hospital? So, you know, there's a bunch of different variables that need to be addressed. I recognize the challenge there, but certainly in terms of our ability to deliver ambulance service, this has been a major hurdle. Councillor Galloway's been, advocating for the dispatch for a long time. That's something that's in a hurdle. This is a major hurdle. So, you know, at some point we have to solve the problem. And when you look at the amount of resources we put into ambulance services over the past 3 years, we've invested over $10 million. In the past 3 years. And we're looking at another 1.2 million. And we see an improvement for a short period of time in terms of response times and unit utilization rates, but then it quickly evaporates because we get stuck in the hospital and we can't get out of the hospital. So, you know, if we can invest more and more money, but until we solve the root of the problem, we're not going to be that much further ahead. So you all recognize that, but it certainly is a very difficult challenge. And finally, I'm just wondering, Chief, any update on the public awareness campaigns or encourage people to phone an ambulance only when they need it?
So through the chair, so we will be bringing a report back probably in March or April with regards to the public campaign on that. And again, just to reiterate, it's sort of hard for us to, we can measure the reach of that program, but we can't sort of measure the negative when they don't call. So it's a little bit difficult for us to do that, but we do have some stats and we will be bringing those back in another report.
All right, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Just a couple of comments, and Chair Redmond can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this issue of offload delays was one that you prioritized in your response to the province on their budget. So it's certainly been addressed. And I think in terms of the there is a community paramedic services which is now up and running, and part of that is to look at helping people use services other than emergency services. Is that correct?
That's correct. And just for reference, we'll be bringing a 6-month report. So the program started October 1st. So after 6 months of data collection, we're going to be bringing a report back to council as well, just to let you know what the success of that program has been. But yeah.
Thank you. Still more speakers. I have Councillor Yaworski.
Thank you, through the chair. I happened to be in the hospital in emergency during in the past month and a half, and I came to realize that you talked about code red, but there's also code yellow, and I always thought those were just statistics, that there's no ambulances available or there's 3 ambulances available. And I came to realize that, and I'll ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, but at the hospital when I was there, they heard the region of Waterloo has declared a code yellow, and people seemed overly distressed, the hospital people, and they told me it's because they have to, every 30 minutes, release a pair of our paramedics back and take that patient, even though they have no room for it, because they can't move the other patients out of emergency. So I just wanted to figure out, first question is that part true about code yellow? Is that how it works?
So through the chair, that's how it's supposed to work, but I'm not sure that actually happens. Typically, it's more when it gets to code red where they're forced to release the medics, but it doesn't happen. We still have offloads of 5+ hours. So that doesn't happen because we're in code yellow quite often. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the data from the dispatch center in time for today's meeting. But we have a lot of code yellows for sure. But yes, we agreed that we would verbalize that we were in code yellow or code red to the emergency departments so that they know what status we're in as a service so that they can start to put plans in place. So it's encouraging that kind of messaging is being heard by yourself or anybody else within the hospital. We just need to move it to that next level.
So I think to Mr. Murray, I think that's a great opportunity for the hospitals, because if our staff were released after 30 minutes when that occurred, although it presents a problem to the hospital where to put people. But I would say that is seems like a good opportunity there. And is the definition of Code Yellow a regional definition, or is that a provincial definition?
Through the chair, it's a regional definition, and we've set that. It was set at three or less. And when you get to 0, it goes to Code Red.
Okay. Is that something we'd ever revisit? I'm just wondering if the opportunity here to advance the process, that maybe it's in light of what's happening here, maybe Code Yellow should be defined as only 4 ambulances left, and that, you know, helps the process move forward more quickly.
Yeah, we've had discussions. In fact, as late as this morning, we had a discussion about that Code Yellow. And I'll just give you an example, because every municipality can set it whatever level they want, and some call it different colors. But for example, when I worked in Niagara, Code Yellow was when there was 11 of 26 resources left. So almost 50% of their fleet, when they hit that, they were in Code Yellow. Right now, we're about 1/8 of our fleet when we hit Code Yellow. So if we move that number to 7 or 10, unfortunately, at this moment, we'd always be in Code Yellow, but it just means that we're in Code Yellow. It doesn't, the vehicle count doesn't change. It just means we're in Code Yellow. So we've talked about changing that level, but the perception, statistically, when you report that we're in Code level or Yellow all the time, there have to be some education around that, especially to the public and yourselves, just to know that just because we're in Code Yellow doesn't mean it's somewhere between 0 and 7. So we can move that number for sure.
And just to thank your team, they were giving very high levels of care to all the people who were waiting there. So thank you to the paramedics.
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback, and we'll pass that on.
Councillor Verbanovich.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the presentation, and thanks for the work, quite frankly, that your team does on a regular basis. Recently needed to call on them for my mom, and the service was excellent. The question I have I don't know if you can flip back to the presentation, but the one slide where you showed our numbers and the, I guess, provincial median numbers, even with the 12 hours that you're talking about, assuming they get approved in budget, we're still fairly off the median, are we not?
So this is the chart you're referring to.
Yeah.
So you're talking about peak ambulances per 100,000?
Yes. Well, both.
So we're at 3.7, and this is EMS peers. This is the median of the peers. So that's the 6 services that we compared ourselves against that are like-sized services within the master plan. So we're at 3.7, and they're at 4. So if you add the 2 12-hour ambulances, you'd have to do the math on there's 575,000 people in the region, and we'd have X number of ambulances. So it's going to move that number up and closer to the median. I don't have the math off the top of my head to say whether we're going to hit the median.
and obviously our paramedic numbers, when we do a 12-hour, that adds how many staff?
That's it's 5 in total, so it's 4 full-time and with 1 FTE equivalent for the backfill side.
Okay, so that would the 2 12-hour ones would take us from 38 to 48 then?
No, because that's per 100,000.
Oh, per 100,000, right, sorry.
You just have to do the math on
Okay. But so needless to say, I mean, we're moving towards where we need to be, but we're still not there if our goal is median.
You're correct.
And is there any reasons to think that our numbers should either be at median or higher or lower based on the demographics of our region? In other words, some regions are older, so you may have different challenges. I mean, what's our sense of that? I mean, generally speaking, I think we tend to be a bit of a younger region. So is that sort of playing into this a little bit?
Yeah, so through the chair, so Apex Pro Consulting is re-looking and refocusing on the projections. So there will be a report coming forward with that as well. You're correct in that this is a younger population within this region, and I can remember maybe 5 years ago we were at 63. What was it? 63 calls per 1,000, something like that. We were very low on the low end of that. The demographics have been changing a bit, but overall, Mr. Murray.
If I could just add a couple of things too, because we've had a lot of discussion about this internally at a staff level. So what I would say is the targets that are sort of driving the resources are more around response time and unit utilization. So, that's what's sort of, driving our request for additional ambulances, additional paramedics. I think we're largely providing this information just as sort of a point of comparison, not necessarily saying, oh, we should or need to be at the median in terms of peak ambulances or paramedics. Really, we're trying to get to certain response times, get to certain utilizations, and this will just be sort of always an interesting comparison. If there, another metric that would be on here would be calls per 100,000 population, and typically we're lower than our median on calls per 100,000 population. So
which would speak to that age demographic.
Right. So we have lower call volume, lower peak ambulances, lower paramedics. So overall, that's not necessarily out of balance. The challenge is we're not necessarily meeting unit utilization targets, code red targets, response time targets. So those are more what's driving the resource needs, I think. Stephen?
Yeah, that's correct. And Council, under the Act, has the right to set the level of service that is required for the region. So that's exactly what you did through the master plan, was set those targets, and that's what we're working towards.
In terms of the, relying on ambulances from adjoining municipalities, coming to our assistance on the weekend, and I guess that's not unlike, what we see happen with fire services, for example, or even police services, quite frankly, if there's a major incident where those kinds of things happen. Is there any... is that a basic requirement of the provincial legislation? Could we one day be faced with a situation where a adjoining municipality says, we're just not going to, we're not going to send any more to you? And does that create a problem for us?
Right. So through the chair. So yes, the answer to the first question is yes. It was very deliberate when the ministry did the download that it was a seamless provision of service across the municipalities. What you've been seeing is a slow erosion of that over the years. For example, we don't send cars on standby outside of our municipality anymore, nor does anyone send cars inside our municipal borders for standby. So we go to the border, but we don't cross that border. We never leave. If you look to the far east and down the Renfrew, Prescott, Russell, Ottawa area, there's a huge battle going on down there because Ottawa is pulling in all the resources from the smaller municipalities, and when they get caught in Ottawa, they get caught in the vortex and they can't get them back. So yes, I think at some point, if there's a change in legislation, there may be a change, but right now it's still seamless.
And, as much as from time to time we're having to borrow from other municipalities, I presume there's probably times when we're not at peak levels where we may actually be sending some out? Or not really?
I can just give you a specific example of between Guelph, Wellington, and ourselves, we share about 700 calls each a year back and forth. So about 2 calls a day we do for them and 2 calls a day they do for us on average.
Okay. That's a good piece of information just to have a sense of what we're talking about. Thank you.
Councillor Kiefer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for the report, Chief, and I'll be very quick. I think part of my answer to my question has been answered by Mr. Murray, but it wasn't too long ago. I was by the. I'm directing my question towards the availability of ambulances, and not too long ago I was by the Cambridge Hospital. I must have counted about 6 or 7 ambulances sitting in there. Is that sort of part of the coordination problem that we're running into with hospitals, or can you comment on that?
So through the chair, so I'm not I'm not sure of the specifics on that particular day. It could have been just that there was a high call volume and they ended up in Cambridge at that time. So we had a surge in call volume within the Cambridge area and they went to that hospital. It's not necessarily a bad thing in terms of coordination between the emergency departments, because if they met certain criteria, they go directly to the closest hospital. So it was probably just due to high volume, but it could have been due to the fact that they were overwhelmed in Kitchener and Waterloo, and they were sending them down to that hospital as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Jowett.
Thank you, through the chair. Thanks, Chief, for the report. So we have actively increased hiring 30 FTEs approximately since 2016, right? Is what we're seeing in the charts. And so the demand to increase is there because of the aging population. And again, I come back to some of the concerns I've had in other areas. It's the same reason that the labor pool that's available is shrinking. So I think there's going to be this, as you probably can attest, this huge peak that's going to hit, and then the boomers are going to, for lack of a better word, expire. and then we will, have a lot of recruits on our hands that maybe we don't need to have that 35% utilization. And I know that sounds a bit cold-hearted, but so what I'm looking for here is I'm one of them, but what I'm looking for here is, your process right now has recruits coming in May, so we're not really going to be able to make a big dent in this challenge right now, but are you looking for, obviously, probably, hope so anyway, automation? Are you looking at the college grads to see what kind of inflow you're having from some of that particular candidate pool? And are you rethinking how maybe we process some of the challenges and triage, and are there all kinds of other things coming into play here so that we can have a better or more sustainable approach to it?
Right, so through the chair, so yes, there's several things that are going on in the background that haven't come to fruition yet. So they opened up the Ambulance Act last year, and they've made some changes to that. One of the big ones will be, for example, transportation to alternate destinations. So right now, the only place we can transport to is hospitals. We can't go to urgent care clinics, we can't go to doctor's offices, we can't go to imaging, anything like that. So that's a big one as well. As the community paramedicine program starts to mature more as well, and the diversion of the community paramedicine, or what level of care that they can actually provide in the community. For example, in one municipal entity within the province, they're actually doing ultrasounds through community paramedicine programs. So they're really moving. Unfortunately, it's not as coordinated as it should be, in my opinion, at this moment, but they are moving towards that. The implementation of the MPDS, which is the triage tool that's used at the dispatch center, that will help us, provided the ministry installs it correctly and gets the right parameters around it. That will help us. And then if you look at, for example, Niagara EMS, because they're an accredited center, they have the ability to do a lot of different things, and they're actually putting like a telehealth nurse within their dispatch center so they can defer calls from 911 over to them, and they have mobile integrated health teams that actually respond out in the community. So there's lots of things, but the problem is you have to have the triage tool, you have to be accredited, you have to have the science behind that and the medical backing to be able to defer people because of the risk piece of it. So yes, there are lots of things that are going on. It's unfortunately just going to take some time before the rest of the province catches up with Toronto and Niagara.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
And Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Clark. This has been really informative. I was really glad that Councillor Jaworski asked the question he did. I'm a big fan of master plans. I like planning. I like implementation that has logic to it. When I was out knocking on doors, one of the things people were telling me is they really did want investment in our paramedics, and I could say to them that has been a real focus in the last couple of budgets. Code Red and moving the dispatch from Cambridge to Hamilton, I think, have sort of converged in people's minds. And I guess I'm just wondering, I didn't realize that we defined Code Red and that Code Red could indeed mean something very different in another community. Is there a way to educate people, or should we look at that? Because when I hear Code Red, you think of green, yellow, red, and that red's really bad, and that yellow is maybe okay, and green is everything's fine. Is there a piece of communication that we could do to sort of dispel some of that free-floating fear out there, or is that fear warranted?
So through the chair, so yeah, certainly we can do an educational piece to the public to put something out through the paper or the website, et cetera, to educate them as to what code yellow and red are within this municipality. As I said, other municipalities, some call it code black, code zero. They can call it whatever they want. There's no standard. We actually have tried to align it with a surge protocol that was set actually out in Calgary, but incorporated into hospitals. So when you're in code red, you have a list of things similar to what Councillor Jaworski was talking about. So at code red, you start moving patients every 15 minutes until the offloads are done, and we can handle the call volume. So yeah, we can certainly do an educational piece on that, and we can bring that back. Not a problem.
I guess the other question, Chief, is if those codes, whatever they're called, are very local and they're defined by the service, how do you compare? How do you have any equity when you compare our stats and our code reds to other areas?
So through the chair, so we don't actually compare to other municipalities because their code black may be at 1 or 2 vehicles. So it's not apples to apples, unfortunately, not for all of them. We could certainly undertake, I can go through the Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs and actually start to gather some statistics on what their codes are and what levels they are and what numbers they've actually been experiencing over the last 3 to 5 years. And I can bring something back if you'd wish.
My suspicion would be that we're not that unique. Would you agree?
Definitely, I would agree that we're not that special. In fact, we might even actually be on the low end compared to some other municipalities.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Through you, Chair. Chief, can you give an idea of what the benefit of the RERUs are?
Yep, through the chair. So the emergency response units, or they used to be called RERUs, Rural Emergency Response Units, typically they're dispatched out to the rural areas and they sit there and they wait for the calls to come in. So they were actually started to stop the clock, the response time clock, and provide care in the municipality until an ambulance could arrive there. And that's still their purpose to this day.
Personally, I think they're a great benefit to the program, especially in the rural areas, because to get somebody there quickly who has some expertise is a really a very special calming process for everyone involved in a call. So I think they're an absolute need for us to have, especially in the rural areas.
I had one final question for me anyway. And maybe I misunderstood, but what I think I heard you say is this cross-municipal sharing can be due to one municipality or the other being in a code red or whatever we call it, but it could also just be due to geography and who can get there fastest. Is that correct?
That's correct. It can be either or.
So do you have off the top of your head an estimate of what proportion of the time it's due to a shortage of ambulances? Either way.
Yeah, so no, as I was stating before, we don't actually compare ourselves to other municipalities in terms of the code reds. Or
no, sorry, I meant when we have another municipality coming in, what percentage of the time is it due to our shortage of vehicles, and what percentage might it be due to the fact that they're simply closest?
Yeah, so no, I don't. Just trying to think how we can do that. But yeah, we can take a look at that. Typically, I would say it's call volume that we just don't have ambulances available. And that could either be just strictly call volume. We have a surge, like, bad weather event, or it could be that we have some offload delay and call volume.
Okay. Thank you. I see no other questions. This item was simply for information. I think it was very informative. And we'll see you at a budget meeting.
Great.
Thank you. We don't have a presentation on the next item on the agenda. However, staff are here to answer any questions. This is Reaching Home, Canada's homelessness strategy. There are 3 recommendations. Moved by Councillor Strickland, seconded by Councillor Jaworski. All in favor? Approved. And similarly, potential impacts of Bill 66 on childcare and early years programs. This is another response from us to some potential provincial changes. And this is, again, there's no presentation, but staff can answer questions if there are any. Seeing none, would someone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Shantz, seconded by Councillor Redmond. All in favor? Approved. Now we're on to the Social Planning of Council of Cambridge and North Dumfries request for funding. You'll recall that they did make a delegation during a budget meeting, and this is staff's recommendation. Councillor Kiefer has a conflict to this on this item. Is there? Councillor Strickland moves it, and Councillor seconds. Any discussion? All in favor? And that item is approved. Wow, you got a lot. You got off the hook on presentations. Capital Works Loan, Region of Waterloo Community Housing. This is an internal transfer of funds, really, and some legal stuff that has to happen around it. Are there any questions of staff? Would anybody like to move the two recommendations? No. Oh, did I skip over Habitat? You skipped. I'm sorry. I skipped Habitat. We'll come back to that one. Did I skip it?
No, you didn't. You're in 7.1.
Yeah.
You're okay.
Okay.
It is for Habitat.
It is for Habitat. Okay. Again, no presentation. This is the development charge matter. And moved by Councillor Jaworski, seconded by Councillor Vrbanovich. All in favor? Oh, sorry. Question, Councillor?
Thank you. Just a quick question, and we may not know the answer to this today, or whether this applies, or whether or not we would need to deal with it separately. But I do know, just from a recent meeting that I had, is that ROOF is in the midst of looking for a new building and shelter that will be part of that. And so the topic of development charges came up in a recent conversation and meeting. So I'm just alerting folks that will likely be a topic of conversation. I don't know if shelters are sort of covered under Section B or whether or not we would have to deal with it on its own, but I'm just sort of raising that as a flag.
Jennifer Murdoch, would you like to speak to that?
Through you, Chair, we are aware that One Roof is moving, and we're working with them to understand their needs and where they want to move, and if there are development charges, what they may be and how we can assist. But if any funding would have to be through a proper RFP process for capital.
Thank you. So I believe I had a mover, but no seconder at this point. Councillor Strickland, all in favor? And passed. All right, we're on to information and correspondence. Council inquiries and requests for information. Is there any other business? Seeing none, our next meeting is Tuesday the 19th, my son's birthday. And can I have a motion to go into closed session? Moved by Councillor Armstrong. And seconded by Councillor Jaworski. Thank you. All in favor? Do I need a motion to adjourn? No. And can I get a motion to adjourn, please? Everybody's in such a hurry. Councillor Kiefer. And second, okay. I know you meant.
I was trying to help and I was unhelpful.